So I've seen a few comments in some of my YouTube videos about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and they all ask about these Gatling guns that Custer had access to. Why didn't he use these Gatling guns? And I understand the line of reasoning. One of the reasons Custer was defeated at the Little Bighorn was he was simply outgunned. He spread himself too thin, and that allowed the overwhelming numbers of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors to wipe him and his men out. But you put a couple of Gatling guns on top of Last Stand Hill, and that's a game changer. These guns spit out hundreds of rounds a minute, and some of them had bores up to an inch wide. Can you imagine getting hit with an inch wide bullet? Clean up on aisle everywhere. Now, the way I see it, there's two different questions that we need to address here. The first one is, did Custer have access to Gatling guns on his way to the Little Bighorn? And the answer is really easy. Yes, he did. General Alfred Terry, the commander of the Dakota column that left Fort Abraham Lincoln, brought three Gatling guns with him from the 20th Infantry. When Terry issued his orders to Custer on the evening of June 21st, 1876, he offered Custer the use of those Gatling guns. Custer declined, and that leads us to the second, more murkier question. Was Custer correct in declining the use of those Gatling guns? Custer explained his reasoning to his officers a few hours after the 7th Cavalry left Terry's column on June 22, 1876. First Lieutenant Edward Godfrey, one of Custer's company commanders, recorded, "He had declined the offer of the Gatling guns for the reason that they might hamper our movements or march at a critical moment, because of the inferior horses and of the difficult nature of the country through which we would march." Now, the bulk of my experience with early Gatling guns comes from hours of Red Dead Redemption, but I don't think that's really going to help us here. We're going to need a grown up. And fortunately, I was able to find one.
Casey Osbach, Chief of Interpretation and Visitor Services here at Fort Laramie National Historic Site. What we have here with us is a model 1876 Centennial Gatling gun. This is a Colt. This is a 45 caliber. This would be the same caliber that those infantry soldiers known to the Northern Great Plains Indian tribes or the indigenous folks as walks of heap. Within the Gilded Age and the Victorian Society, they were known as doughboys. And of course, they used the famous 1873 trapdoor rifle. This would be the standard cartridge. It's got a 405 grain bullet. This Gatling gun would use that same cartridge. Now, for those cavalrymen, those soldiers of horse, they also used the trapdoor 1873 model out here, but it had a 22-inch barrel with 55 grains of black powder. There's 10 barrels. Those, of course, would rotate with a hand crank here. So on a carriage weighing about a little over 200 pounds, and then you had an additional 200 pounds with the actual carriage. The early Gatlings had a range of about 500 to 600 yards and a rate of fire of about 200 to 300 rounds per minute. Many folks may know that the first Gatling gun of 1862 had less range and less firing capacity because those were percussion-fired weaponry. So by 1876, Gatling had been able to improve this piece of combat equipment to a point where he actually had cartridge firing rounds. Rate of fire about 400 or 500 roughly, and maybe 800 to 1,000 yards distance. Now, one of the challenges, though, with this is these barrels could not rotate. There was no way on any access for all of these barrels. So if you're on the field of battle, ladies and gentlemen, you would have to lift up the trail of the artillery piece. Four-person crew, four-soldier crew, would have to alternate the trail, which is at the tail end of the carriage, to be able to move the actual barrels. Out here in the American West, with thousands upon thousands of miles of terrain, geography, rough geography at that, the U.S. Army is going up against some of the best light-mounted cavalrymen in the world. Those indigenous warriors had learned how to ride a horse at a very, very young age. Artillery is not as effective. I would say through the years, Travis, and between 1849 and 1890, there was just under 900 skirmishes and battles in the American West. Those were predominantly used without artillery, including these battery guns, these 1876 Gatlings. However, those field commanders, those tacticians, there were battles such as the Red River War of 1874. Nelson Miles effectively deployed some Gatlings. against Apache and so forth, as well as General Oliver Otis Howard also deployed a battery of Gatling guns in the Nez Perce Wars. So they were deployed. However, as with any military field commanders, the key to the field of battle is the assessment in 360 of your terrain, of your geography, and so forth. And a lot of times out west, again, it was not suitable nor conducive. These fast moving cavalry battles that were sustained was not conducive for any type of field artillery, including platoons of Gatlings.
Shout out to the National Park Service folks over at Fort Laramie, Wyoming. You guys were awesome to work with. Thanks for doing the interview. And if you guys are rolling through Wyoming, they always have events and activities going on at Fort Laramie. They call it the Embassy of the Plains. So be sure to check them out. Now, back in the day, field commanders thought of Gatling guns as another artillery piece. They treated it like a cannon instead of a mobile firepower platform like we would think of a machine gun today. Gatling guns had an unparalleled rate of fire. There was nothing on the battlefield like them. And that gave them a psychological impact that you couldn't find with other weapons.
In 1863, during the Civil War, the U.S. government started moving toward recruitment of citizenry through conscription laws, and a lot of folks were against it. So you had mass riots going on. They start deploying these Gatling guns into the streets of New York City to squelch labor riots, activist riots against the Civil War, and so forth. That would set the stage years down the road into the 1870s and 1880s.
For example, almost 20 years after the Little Bighorn during the Johnson County War, one of the invaders wrote about how the invaders' fear when they were at the TA ranch was that a Gatling gun from Fort McKinney would fall into the hands of the locals and be used against them. The leaders of the mob claimed that the mob could stand the sheriff's posse off for a week if necessary without losing any men, if the friends of the mob in Buffalo would closely watch the soldiers at McKinney and prevent the soldiers at McKinney from stealing out a Gatling gun and turning it over to sheriff's posse, some of whom mob said were ex-soldiers and knew how to work a cannon.
Was it a psychological effect? Absolutely. You've got 10 rotating barrels here.
Now, on the other hand, Gatling guns were very heavy and super slow. A few days before Custer had left on the Little Bighorn, Major Marcus Reno had left on a scout of the area, and his men had brought a Gatling gun with them. It caused them nothing but problems, and even tipped over at one point, injuring some of the soldiers. Gatling guns required their own horses and its own ammunition supply. In fact, if Custer had taken Gatling guns with him to the Little Bighorn, those would have been the only things with wheels on them. Everything else would have been carried by horse.
Fast moving guerrilla warfare tactics of the American West was not conducive for any artillery, especially when you have iron tires and so forth. You had a rapidity of fire, you had a 400 rounds per minute. This would have been very effective. But again, it just wasn't set up for the terrain out here, nor the adversary that the Army was going up against. No doubt it's asked on a regular basis if George Custer and the 7th Regiment of Horse would have had Gatling guns that were offered to him from the 20th Infantry. Would the tables have turned? It's speculative, right? What do we know from the facts? We know from the facts of that battle that he was overwhelmed. There's no doubt. The use of those Gatling guns in that terrain, if you walk the field of battle in south central Montana at Little Bighorn, you will see the amount of gullies, washes, arroyos. Wheeled vehicles would have never been effective. Any military tactician that assesses that field of battle will attest to that. Would the rapidity of fire on that field been effective if he could have deployed them? Anything would have helped, I'm sure. Would the psychological effects of having Gatlings there potentially squelched the adversarial tribal folks? Potentially as well. There's no doubt if the 7th Regiment of Horse could have had Gatlings, it may have made some impact of some sort. But again, remember, the geography plays into any military tactician platform. And that geography of south central Montana is very rough.
Gatling guns also needed a lot of horsepower to tow the guns and its ammunition supply, something that Custer was critically short of. In fact, Custer was so low on horses, he had to leave his regimental band behind at one of the supply depots in order to free up horses for more troopers. Had Custer brought Gatling guns with him to the Little Bighorn, those would have been the only items that he brought in his pack train that had wheels. Everything else was mounted on horses or mules.
If the geography is conducive, you're going to deploy a platoon, which would be 3 of these guns, with 4 enlisted soldier crews with caissons. And folks that aren't familiar with caisson, essentially what a caisson would be a limber where you have two ammunition chests, you have four horses, and then a caisson would have another set of a single axle ammunition boxes attached.
It's also important to remember how these guns were aimed. They had no T&E mechanism, no traverse and elevation mechanism to them, and that required men being out in the open to aim. It's fair to say that modern media has distorted our perception of how these early Gatling guns were actually employed. Doggone, the Germans can make beer. The question of Custer and his Gatling guns is going to be one of those things that we're never going to solve, but it is fun to talk about. So now's your chance. Go ahead and leave your thoughts in a comment below and let everybody know if you would have brought those guns with you or if you think Custer made the right choice and left them behind. And while you're doing that, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow the story out west so that you know when another video drops. Thanks for watching.
And I'll just close with this one last marketing. Fort Laramie, of course, again, is world recognized. And we like to hone in on three key themes, Travis, and I think your viewers will enjoy this. The cultural crossroads of the two rivers, the Laramie and North Platte River, also the global economic aspect of the fur trade and so forth. And then lastly, the embassy on the plains with the treaties of the 1851 Horse Creek and the 1868 treaty. So Travis, thanks again for being here. And we hope to visit with you all soon. And maybe we'll see some of your viewers here at the Old Fort. Take care, everybody.